the storm arrived over Washington, D.C. just before sunset. Rain tapped against the glass walls of the Grand Crescent Hotel, while the city's political elite gathered beneath crystal chandeliers. Inside the ballroom, senators exchanged handshakes, corporate executives discussed influence, and photographers documented every carefully staged smile. It looked like a celebration. Beneath the surface, it felt more like a performance. Maya Bennett entered through the service corridor carrying a garment bag over one shoulder and a stack of law school notes inside her backpack. At 29 years old, she was balancing two demanding worlds. By day, she was a third-year student at Georgetown Law. By night, she worked private events to cover tuition and living expenses. The schedule was exhausting, but independence mattered to her. Her father had offered financial help countless times. She always declined. The catering kitchen buzzed with organized chaos. Steam rose from stainless steel counters while cooks shouted timing updates across the room. Marcus Reed, the head chef, spotted Maya tying her apron. At 65, he had spent decades feeding powerful people while remaining invisible to most of them. He had also known Maya since childhood. "You look just like your mother tonight," Marcus said softly. Maya glanced at the gold bracelet resting on her wrist. It had belonged to her mother, Eleanor. The bracelet was simple, elegant, and irreplaceable. She wore it every day. "She would have hated this event," Maya replied. Marcus laughed. She definitely would have hated the speeches, maybe the food too. For a moment, Maya smiled. The memory hurt, but it also reminded her why she kept moving forward. Her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She looked at the screen and immediately recognized the caller. Her expression softened. After a brief hesitation, she silenced the call. "Not answering?" Marcus asked. "Later," Maya said. "I need to work." Minutes later, she stepped into the ballroom. The contrast was striking. The service hallways were cold and practical. The ballroom looked like another universe. Massive chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors. Guests wore designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos. Every table represented wealth most Americans could barely imagine. Maya moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. She balanced trays of champagne and appetizers while remaining almost invisible. Service workers were expected to appear when needed and disappear when noticed. Across the room, event coordinator Lauren Whitmore nervously checked her watch. One VIP table near the stage remained empty. A silver placard displayed the evening's keynote speaker. The chair had not yet been filled. At precisely 7:15, Police Captain Richard Coleman entered the ballroom. His decorated uniform attracted immediate attention. For 23 years, he had built a reputation as a respected public safety official. Tonight, he carried himself like a man accustomed to authority. As Coleman scanned the room, his eyes landed on Maya. Something about her immediately captured his attention, not because she was causing trouble, not because she stood out. She was simply doing her job. Yet he continued watching. Nearby, a young officer named Daniel Brooks noticed the captain's expression. A quiet feeling of unease settled into his stomach. Across the ballroom, Maya's phone vibrated again. The same caller. She stared at the screen for several seconds before slipping the phone away. Near the stage, Lauren glanced once more toward the empty VIP chair. Neither woman realized they were connected by a secret that would soon shake the entire ballroom. And neither knew that before the night ended, one powerful man would make a decision that would destroy everything he had spent decades building. Captain Richard Coleman waited exactly 12 minutes before making his first move. Maya was serving champagne near a group of donors discussing campaign strategies when he stepped directly into her path. His posture was rigid. His expression carried the confidence of a man rarely questioned. "Identification," he said. Maya blinked once. "My employee badge is right here, Captain." She turned slightly, showing the catering credential clipped to her uniform. Her photograph, employee number, and event authorization were clearly visible. Coleman removed the badge and inspected it longer than necessary. He examined both sides, studying it as though searching for an excuse. Several nearby guests watched quietly. Finally, he handed it back. "I'll be keeping an eye on you tonight," he said. Maya met his gaze. "All right." She continued working. Her hands remained steady until she reached the service station. Only then did a brief tremor pass through her fingers. Marcus noticed immediately from the kitchen doorway. His jaw tightened. He had spent decades recognizing trouble before it arrived. This felt like trouble. Less than a minute later, another server accidentally dropped a tray beside table 5. Glass shattered across the floor. Red wine splashed onto an expensive white gown. Guests gasped. The young server, a nervous white college student named Tyler, apologized repeatedly. Captain Coleman glanced toward the commotion. Then he looked away. No credential inspection, no warning, no threats. Nothing. Several guests noticed the difference. Among them was City Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan. She had spent years studying patterns of power. Sometimes discrimination announced itself loudly. More often, it appeared in small moments most people ignored. She quietly activated her phone camera. Across the ballroom, Coleman spoke into his radio. Officer Daniel Brooks approached. "Run a background check on the Bennett woman," Coleman ordered. Daniel hesitated. "The server? That's the one. For what reason?" Coleman's eyes narrowed. "Because I told you to." Daniel nodded reluctantly. The order felt wrong, yet challenging a commanding officer could end a young career before it began. As Maya continued serving guests, she remained unaware that her name was now moving through department databases. At another table, Lauren Whitmore stared once again at the empty seat reserved for the keynote speaker. The guest of honor still had not arrived. She checked her phone. Nothing. The schedule was beginning to unravel. Meanwhile, Maya carried a fresh tray toward the ballroom center. A retired federal judge thanked her politely. A business executive ignored her completely. A senator accepted a drink without making eye contact. The evening continued exactly as these events always did. Powerful people spoke about justice, while service workers quietly supported the illusion. Then everything changed. Nearly 40 minutes after the first confrontation, Captain Coleman intercepted Maya again. This time, he was not subtle. "Empty your pockets," he ordered. Conversations nearby stopped. Maya stared at him. "Excuse me? A valuable item has been reported missing." "What item?" "That's not your concern. Empty your pockets." The accusation spread through the surrounding tables like a ripple through still water. Maya remained calm. Inside, anger and disbelief collided. "Have hotel security contacted you?" she asked. "I'm asking the questions." Several guests lowered their eyes. Nobody intervened. Nobody challenged him. The silence felt louder than any argument. Slowly, Maya removed the contents of her apron, a pen, a notepad. Lip balm, her phone, nothing else. Coleman examined each item. When he reached her phone, the screen illuminated briefly. Incoming call. Dad. The captain barely noticed, but one woman seated nearby did. She frowned. Something about that single word caught her attention. Coleman returned the phone. His expression hardened. The search had produced nothing. Yet somehow he seemed even more determined. "You're coming with me," he said. "On what grounds?" Maya asked. "Further investigation." A heavy silence settled over the ballroom. Near the stage, Lauren Whitmore watched the confrontation unfold. For the first time all evening, she felt genuine fear. Not for the event, not for the donors, for Maya. Because something about Captain Coleman's behavior no longer looked professional. It looked personal. And as Maya followed him toward the service hallway, Lauren glanced once more at the keynote speaker's empty chair. A sudden, impossible thought flashed through her mind. She looked at the silver placard. Then she looked at Maya, and a disturbing possibility began taking shape. The service hallway felt like a different world. The music from the ballroom faded behind heavy doors. Crystal chandeliers gave way to fluorescent lights. Expensive perfume disappeared beneath the scent of industrial cleaners and stainless steel. Captain Richard Coleman stopped walking. "Turn around," he ordered. Maya Bennett stood perfectly still. "Why?" "Because I'm directing you to. You still haven't identified a crime." Coleman's jaw tightened. He was accustomed to obedience. Most people became nervous when confronted by authority. Most people apologized, explained themselves, or surrendered immediately. Maya did none of those things. She simply stood there, calm, confident, unafraid. That confidence irritated him more than he cared to admit. "A complaint has been made," he said. "Then identify the complaint." I don't have to discuss an active investigation. Actually, you do if you're detaining someone without probable cause. For a brief moment, something flashed across Coleman's face. Surprise. Not because she challenged him, because she knew the law. What did you say? I'm a law student. The hallway became very quiet. Several hotel employees had stopped working and were watching from a distance. Marcus Reed stood near the kitchen entrance. His hands were clenched into fists. Every instinct told him to step forward. Every year of experience told him that doing so might make things worse. Coleman took one step closer. You think that changes anything? No, Maya replied. Then stop arguing. I'm not arguing. I'm asking for legal justification. The words landed harder than either expected, because both of them understood what was really happening. This was no longer about a missing item, if it ever had been. Back inside the ballroom, guests had begun whispering. Rumors traveled quickly among influential people. Some claimed a theft had occurred. Others suspected a security threat. Few knew the truth. Fewer wanted to know. Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan continued recording. Years in politics had taught her that truth often survived because somebody pressed record before everyone else looked away. Near the stage, Lauren Whitmore stared at the keynote speaker's information packet. Her heart pounded. She looked at the printed name. Then she looked toward the hallway, then back at the name. Again. Her stomach dropped, because the last name on the keynote speaker's biography matched Maya's. Exactly. Lauren shook her head. The possibility seemed impossible, yet she couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks finally received the results from the background inquiry. He opened the file. At first, nothing appeared unusual. No criminal record, no arrests, no citations, outstanding academic performance, community service, scholarships. Then Daniel reached the emergency contact section. His eyes widened. He read it twice, then a third time. His face lost color. Oh my God, he whispered. Back in the hallway, Maya crossed her arms. Am I free to return to work? Coleman ignored the question. I've dealt with people like you before. The statement lingered. Maya immediately understood what he meant. So did everyone listening. People like me. Coleman realized his mistake the moment the words left his mouth, but pride prevented retreat. People who think rules don't apply to them. Maya held his gaze. Interesting choice of words. The captain's expression darkened. Across the hallway, Marcus quietly muttered a prayer. He had seen enough life to recognize a dangerous combination. Authority mixed with ego, neither surrendered easily. At that exact moment, Daniel Brooks appeared at the hallway entrance. He looked terrified. Captain, he said. Coleman turned. What? Daniel hesitated. Dozens of eyes watched him. His mouth felt dry. We need to talk privately. Whatever it is can wait. No, sir, it really can't. Something in Daniel's voice caused several people to glance at each other. The young officer wasn't nervous. He was frightened. Coleman stepped toward him impatiently. Then tell me, Daniel lowered his voice. Only 6 words escaped his lips, 6 words that instantly changed everything. Her father is arriving now, sir. Coleman frowned. And, Daniel swallowed, you really need to see who he is. Before Coleman could respond, the ballroom doors opened. A sudden silence rolled through the entire hotel. The kind of silence that appears when someone important enters a room. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. And for the first time that night, Captain Richard Coleman felt an unfamiliar sensation, a hint of uncertainty. The ballroom fell silent before anyone understood why. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered above expensive plates. Even the servers froze. A man had entered, not because he demanded attention, because his presence naturally commanded it. James Bennett walked through the front entrance with measured confidence. At 59 years old, he carried the reputation of a man whose decisions influenced national conversations. His dark suit was simple. His expression was calm. Yet the room responded to him instantly. Some guests recognized him immediately. Others recognized the reaction of those who did. Lauren Whitmore nearly dropped her event binder. The keynote speaker had finally arrived, and her worst suspicion had just become reality. Inside the service hallway, Officer Daniel Brooks stared toward the ballroom entrance. His pulse raced. "Captain," he said quietly, "you need to come with me right now." Richard Coleman frowned. "I'm busy." "No, sir. You're not understanding." Before Daniel could explain further, Lauren rushed into the hallway. Her face had gone completely pale. "Captain Coleman," she said. Her voice trembled. "The keynote speaker is here." "And?" "His name is James Bennett." For several seconds nobody spoke. Maya remained perfectly still. Marcus Reed closed his eyes. Daniel looked toward the floor. Only Coleman seemed confused. Then realization began spreading across his face, slowly, painfully. His eyes moved from Lauren to Maya, then back again. "Bennett?" he asked. Lauren nodded. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, much smaller, because James Bennett was not simply a keynote speaker. He was one of the nation's most respected voices on legal reform, a former federal prosecutor, a best-selling author, a trusted advisor to multiple administrations. His speeches influenced legislation. His opinions appeared in national newspapers. His name opened doors across Washington. And Maya Bennett was his daughter. Daniel finally found his voice. The background check confirmed it. Coleman's expression hardened. For one brief moment, pride fought against reason. Then reason lost. "This changes nothing," he said. The statement shocked everyone, even himself. Maya stared at him. There was sadness in her eyes now. Not fear, not anger, sadness. Because she understood exactly what he had revealed. If her father's identity changed everything, then this had never been about evidence, never about procedure, never about safety. It had always been about who he believed she was. Back inside the ballroom, James Bennett greeted donors and public officials with polite professionalism. Yet something felt wrong. His daughter always answered his calls eventually. Tonight she hadn't. 3 missed calls. No response. An uneasy feeling settled in his chest. Then he noticed something strange. Guests kept looking toward the service corridor. Some appeared uncomfortable. Others looked embarrassed. A few couldn't meet his eyes. Years of courtroom experience had sharpened his instincts. Something had happened. He immediately sensed it. Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan approached him. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "there may be something you need to see." James studied her face. Whatever she was about to say clearly disturbed her. "Where is my daughter?" he asked. Rebecca hesitated, then she pointed toward the hallway. James didn't wait for an explanation. He started walking. Guests instinctively moved aside. The crowd parted before him. Behind him followed Rebecca. Then Lauren, then dozens of curious attendees. Word spread rapidly. Within seconds, nearly half the ballroom was watching. In the hallway, Richard Coleman suddenly felt sweat forming beneath his collar. For the first time all evening, confidence abandoned him. Not because James Bennett was powerful, but because deep down he already knew the truth. He had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Closer, closer. Then James Bennett appeared at the hallway entrance. His eyes immediately found Maya. Everything else disappeared. The guests, the staff, the officers. All of it vanished. Father and daughter looked at each other across the fluorescent-lit corridor. Neither spoke, yet everyone present felt the emotional weight of that moment. James noticed the tension in Maya's face. He noticed the crowd. He noticed Captain Coleman. And then he noticed something else. A fresh red mark forming around his daughter's wrist where someone had grabbed her. His expression remained calm. But something dangerous awakened behind his eyes. The kind of controlled anger built over decades. The kind that never needed to shout. And every person standing in that hallway suddenly understood one thing. The real confrontation was only beginning. The hallway remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody dared interrupt. James Bennett stood facing his daughter while dozens of guests crowded behind him. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher now, exposing every uncomfortable truth hidden beneath the glamour of the evening. Maya straightened her shoulders. "Hi, Dad," her voice was calm. The words struck Captain Richard Coleman harder than any accusation could have, because hearing her say them made everything undeniable. James looked at the faint red mark on her wrist, then at Coleman, then back to Maya. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Are you certain?" "Yes." James nodded once. Only once. Yet something about that small movement felt heavier than anger. He stepped closer. Tell me what happened. The crowd held its breath. Maya glanced around the hallway. She saw hotel employees, police officers, donors, politicians, people with influence, people with money, people who had watched everything happen. Captain Coleman stopped me twice, she said. He inspected my credentials, then he accused me of being involved in a theft that never existed. James listened without interruption. Years in courtrooms had taught him the value of silence. People revealed more when allowed to finish. When I asked for evidence, Maya continued, he couldn't provide any. When I asked for probable cause, he couldn't explain any. The hallway grew quieter. Several guests lowered their eyes. They remembered standing nearby. They remembered remaining silent. That memory now felt uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. James finally turned toward Coleman. Is any part of my daughter's statement inaccurate? The question was simple. The answer should have been simple too. Yet Coleman struggled to respond. Mr. Bennett, I was conducting a security assessment. That's not what I asked. The captain swallowed. There were concerns. Documented where? Silence. Who reported them? Silence. What evidence supported them? Silence again. Every unanswered question made the atmosphere heavier. Coleman could feel control slipping away. For years, people had accepted his explanations without challenge. Tonight was different. Tonight, someone was asking for facts, and facts were exactly what he lacked. Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan stepped forward. I recorded most of the interaction, she said. Several heads turned, including the initial credential check. Coleman's stomach dropped. Rebecca continued, there was another server involved in an actual accident nearby. Captain Coleman never approached him. More uncomfortable silence followed, because many people had witnessed the same thing. Nobody could honestly deny it. Officer Daniel Brooks finally stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his voice remained steady. Sir, there was no theft report. The words landed like a thunderclap. Coleman turned toward him immediately. Officer, there wasn't, Daniel said. I checked every communication channel. No complaint was ever filed. Gasps spread through the crowd. The situation had shifted. This was no longer one person's accusation against another. Now multiple witnesses were telling the same story. James Bennett looked directly at Daniel. You're certain? Yes, sir. The young officer took a deep breath. Then he made a decision that would change his career forever. The investigation was initiated solely by Captain Coleman. The hallway exploded with whispers. Coleman's face turned pale. For the first time all night, genuine fear appeared. Not fear of embarrassment, fear of consequences. James remained remarkably calm. That calm frightened Coleman even more. Because experienced professionals understood a dangerous truth. The loudest anger often fades quickly. The quiet kind lasts. Captain, James said, do you understand what you're being accused of? Coleman opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because I do, James continued, and every person standing here understands it too. Across the hallway, Marcus Reed watched Maya carefully. Despite everything that had happened, she remained composed. Strong, steady, her mother would have been proud. Very proud. Then something unexpected happened. A woman near the back of the crowd raised her hand. She was one of the donors, seated near Maya earlier. I saw it too, she said. Another voice followed. So did I. Then another, and another. One witness became 4, 4 became 10. The silence that had protected Coleman all evening suddenly disappeared. People were finally speaking. And once the truth starts moving through a crowd, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The atmosphere inside the hallway transformed completely. An hour earlier, Maya Bennett had stood alone. Now the truth had company. One witness after another stepped forward. A retired judge described the credential inspection. A non-profit director confirmed the second confrontation. A hotel manager stated there had never been a theft report. Each testimony added another crack to the foundation beneath Captain Richard Coleman's career. The crowd no longer looked at Maya with suspicion. They looked at Coleman, and they did not like what they saw. James Bennett listened carefully. He never interrupted, never argued, never raised his voice. His restraint made the moment more powerful, because everyone understood he could have dominated the room if he wanted. Instead, he allowed facts to speak for themselves. That choice carried weight. Maya noticed it too. She knew her father well. He was angry, furious actually, but he also understood that lasting change rarely comes from outrage alone. It comes from accountability. Captain Coleman glanced around the hallway. Every direction looked worse than the last. The guests were watching, the officers were watching, the event staff were watching. Even the people who had remained silent earlier were now paying close attention. His authority had begun slipping away, and he knew it. "This situation is being exaggerated," Coleman finally said. The statement immediately backfired. Several witnesses exchanged stunned looks. A donor near the front shook his head. "Exaggerated?" he asked. "We all watched it happen." Others nodded. The momentum was shifting rapidly. Coleman could feel it. For years, his confidence had relied upon a simple assumption. Most people avoid conflict. Most people stay quiet. Most people choose comfort over courage. Tonight, that assumption was failing. Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan stepped forward again. "Captain, why did you focus on Maya specifically?" The question hung in the air. Everyone wanted the answer, including Coleman. Because deep down, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Bias rarely announces itself clearly. It hides inside assumptions, instincts, habits, stories people tell themselves until they mistake prejudice for judgment. "I was following my training," Coleman replied. Rebecca stared at him. "No training manual teaches officers to invent complaints." The crowd murmured. Another direct hit. Across the hallway, Officer Daniel Brooks looked exhausted. The stress of the evening had aged him, yet something unexpected was happening. For the first time since arriving, he felt relief, not because the situation was improving, because he had finally stopped protecting something he knew was wrong. That realization mattered, more than he expected. Meanwhile, Lauren Whitmore received a message from hotel security. She read it once, then twice. Her eyes widened. "The bracelet has been located," she announced. Every conversation stopped. "What bracelet?" someone asked. "The supposedly missing item." She held up her phone. It was found in a guest's coat pocket, exactly where staff initially logged it. The hallway erupted, not with shouting, with disbelief. Because the final excuse had just vanished. There was no theft, no missing property, no suspicious behavior, no legitimate reason for anything that had happened. Maya closed her eyes briefly, not from relief, from disappointment. Part of her had hoped the situation might reveal a misunderstanding, an honest mistake, something redeemable. Instead, the evidence pointed somewhere much darker. Across from her, James noticed the expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Maya looked around the hallway, at the guests, the staff, the officers, the witnesses. Then she answered, "I'm thinking about all the people who never get this moment." The room fell silent again. "What do you mean?" James asked. "Most people don't have cameras recording. Most people don't have dozens of witnesses. Most people don't have someone powerful walking through the door." No one argued, because everyone knew she was right. The statement landed harder than any accusation, harder than any speech, harder than any evidence. For the first time that evening, several guests looked genuinely ashamed, not because of what Captain Coleman had done, because of what they had failed to do. And that realization would follow many of them long after the gala ended. The gala officially ended at 10 o'clock. Nobody noticed. The scheduled speeches were forgotten. The auction results became irrelevant. Every conversation in the ballroom revolved around a single subject. What had happened to Maya Bennett? Guests gathered in small groups, replaying the events again and again. Some defended their silence, others struggled to explain it. Most simply looked uncomfortable, because deep down they understood something painful. Doing nothing had been a choice. Back in the hallway, representatives from the Metropolitan Police Department's Professional Standards Office arrived. 2 investigators entered, carrying notebooks and evidence bags. They moved with calm efficiency. No drama, no speeches, just procedure. Exactly the kind of procedure that should have existed from the beginning. Captain Richard Coleman watched them approach. For the first time in more than 2 decades, he felt powerless. The sensation terrified him. An investigator introduced herself. "Captain Coleman, we need your badge, service weapon, and incident documentation." Coleman stared at her. "This is happening immediately." "Yes, sir." The answer was simple, final, no negotiation, no delay. Several officers nearby avoided eye contact. Not because they hated Coleman, because they knew exactly what this moment meant. Every law enforcement career rests on public trust. Once that trust breaks, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. Across the corridor, Maya sat quietly at a small staff table. For the first time all evening, she looked tired. The emotional weight was finally catching up with her. Marcus Reed placed a cup of coffee beside her. "Drink," he said. "You look exhausted." Maya smiled faintly. "I am exhausted." Marcus sat down beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside, rain continued striking the hotel windows. Washington's skyline glowed through the darkness. A beautiful city. A complicated city. A city built by people constantly arguing about justice while struggling to practice it. "Your mother would be proud," Marcus said quietly. Maya looked down at the bracelet. The red mark around her wrist remained visible. "I hope so. I know so." His certainty made her eyes glisten briefly, not with sadness, with gratitude. Meanwhile, James Bennett stood near the ballroom entrance, speaking with Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan. They discussed accountability, oversight, training, policy failures. Yet eventually the conversation became personal. "You knew something was wrong before most people did," James said. Rebecca nodded. "I've seen similar situations before. And you recorded it." "Because evidence matters." James smiled slightly. "That's exactly what my daughter would say." Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks sat alone. His statement had become central to the investigation, yet instead of relief, he felt conflicted. He kept replaying the night in his mind. Not the moment he spoke up, the moment he stayed silent. That was the memory he couldn't escape. He remembered Coleman's first order. Watch her. He remembered knowing it felt wrong and doing nothing. The realization haunted him. Because courage delayed is not the same as courage denied, but the damage between those moments can be enormous. Near midnight, investigators escorted Coleman toward a private conference room. The crowd parted again. This time nobody looked impressed, nobody looked intimidated, they looked disappointed. Coleman noticed. Every single person noticed. As he passed through the ballroom, his eyes briefly met Maya's. Neither spoke, yet something important happened. For the first time all evening, he truly saw her. Not as a server, not as a suspect, not as a stereotype, as a person, a real human being. The realization came far too late. But it came. And sometimes the most painful consequences begin with finally seeing the truth. As the conference room door closed behind him, investigators opened their files. Inside were witness statements, security logs, video recordings, and one newly discovered document. A document connected to 3 previous complaints against Captain Richard Coleman. Complaints that someone had quietly buried years earlier, until tonight. And as investigators began reading those files, the scope of the problem suddenly became much larger than a single evening at a charity gala. 3 days later, the story dominated headlines across Washington. News stations replayed footage from the gala. Commentators debated accountability. Editorial boards published opinions. Social media exploded with arguments. Some people called the incident an isolated failure. Others insisted it represented something much larger. For Maya Bennett, the attention felt overwhelming. She had never wanted to become a symbol. She wanted to become a lawyer. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet life rarely asks permission before assigning unexpected roles. On a rainy Thursday morning, Maya sat inside a classroom at Georgetown Law. Students normally discussed constitutional theory. That day, everyone discussed her. The attention made her uncomfortable. After class, Professor Helen Crawford asked Maya to stay behind. The professor had spent 30 years teaching civil rights law. She had seen generations of students enter the profession believing they could change the world. Some succeeded, many became discouraged. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Maya considered the question carefully. Honestly, I don't know. Professor Crawford nodded. That's a very honest answer. Maya stared out the window. Rain rolled down the glass. Students crossed the campus below carrying umbrellas. Life continued, even after extraordinary events. Everyone keeps talking about what happened, Maya said. Nobody talks about how often things like this happen without cameras. The professor remained silent. She understood. Sometimes agreement requires no words. Across the city, investigators continued reviewing Captain Richard Coleman's history. What they discovered was disturbing. The 3 previously buried complaints followed nearly identical patterns. Questionable stops, weak justifications, missing documentation, targets who shared similar backgrounds. Individually, each case had been dismissed. Together, they revealed something impossible to ignore, a pattern. The findings expanded the investigation significantly. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks received a summons. He was scheduled to testify before an internal review panel. The prospect terrified him, not because he feared punishment, because he feared confronting his own decisions. The night before the hearing, he barely slept. Every memory returned, the credential check, the accusations, his silence. Then Maya's words. Most people don't get this moment. The sentence refused to leave him alone. At the same time, Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan began drafting legislation. She worked late into the night inside her office. Pages accumulated across her desk, policy recommendations, oversight procedures, mandatory reporting requirements. She understood something many politicians missed. Public outrage creates opportunities. Real change requires structure. Without structure, outrage fades. Systems remain unchanged. Back at the hotel, event coordinator Lauren Whitmore struggled with her own conscience. She remembered seeing warning signs. She remembered feeling uncomfortable. Yet she had prioritized protecting the event, protecting donors, protecting appearances. The realization bothered her deeply. One evening, she called Maya. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. There were apologies, honest admissions, difficult truths. When the call ended, neither woman felt completely better, but both felt lighter. Growth often begins there, not with perfection, with accountability. A week later, investigators released preliminary findings. The report immediately shocked city leaders, because the evidence suggested the problem extended beyond one captain. Several supervisors had received complaints over the years. Several supervisors had ignored them. The issue was no longer one man's behavior. It was an entire chain of decisions. That revelation changed everything. What began as a single confrontation inside a hotel hallway was evolving into something much larger, something capable of reshaping careers, policies, and institutions. And as Maya read the report late that evening, one sentence captured her attention. Investigators recommended reopening multiple unresolved cases, cases involving people whose stories had never been heard, people who never received justice. Until now, the city council chamber was standing room only. Reporters filled every available seat. Camera crews lined the walls. Community leaders, police officers, attorneys, and ordinary citizens crowded into the room. What began as a single incident at a charity gala had become the most significant public accountability hearing Washington had seen in years. Maya Bennett sat quietly near the back. She had been invited to speak. She almost declined. Part of her wanted to return to normal life, to focus on classes, to finish law school, to disappear from headlines. But another part of her understood something important. People who are given a platform rarely receive it twice. When the hearing began, Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan presented the findings. The room listened carefully. Several unresolved complaints had been reopened. Internal oversight failures had been identified. New recommendations proposed independent review boards and mandatory reporting requirements. The presentation lasted nearly an hour. Yet the most powerful testimony came from someone unexpected. Officer Daniel Brooks. He approached the microphone slowly. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear of public speaking, from the weight of responsibility. "I followed an order that I knew felt wrong," he began. The room became silent. "I convinced myself it wasn't my place to challenge it. I told myself someone else would step in. Someone else would say something." He paused. Nobody did. Several people lowered their eyes because they recognized themselves in those words. Daniel continued, "The truth is that systems fail when individuals surrender their judgment. Authority matters, experience matters, rank matters, but conscience matters too." No applause followed, only reflection. Sometimes the strongest statements require silence afterward. Next came testimony from people whose cases had recently been reopened. A business owner who had been detained without explanation, a college student whose complaint had disappeared, a retired teacher who spent years believing nobody cared. One by one they spoke. One by one the room listened. For many attendees it was the first time these stories had been heard publicly. For the individuals sharing them, it was the first time anyone had truly listened. When Maya's turn finally arrived, she walked toward the microphone. The chamber watched. Reporters prepared their notebooks. Cameras focused. Maya looked across the room. Then she surprised everyone. She didn't begin by discussing Captain Coleman. She didn't begin by discussing race. She didn't even begin with her own experience. Instead, she spoke about responsibility. "Everyone keeps asking what happened that night," she said. "I think a better question is why it kept happening before that night." The statement immediately captured attention. People want villains because villains are simple. If one person caused the problem, removing that person feels like a solution, but real problems are rarely that simple. She paused. The larger issue wasn't one captain, it was a culture where too many people saw something wrong and assumed someone else would handle it. The words landed throughout the chamber. Officials, citizens, officers, reporters, everyone felt their weight. "Change doesn't happen when one bad decision is punished," Maya continued. "Change happens when good people stop looking away." For several seconds after she finished, nobody spoke. The silence felt meaningful, earned. When she returned to her seat, James Bennett smiled quietly. Not because she had spoken perfectly, because she had spoken honestly. Outside the chamber, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Yet the biggest surprise arrived later that evening. Investigators released their final recommendation. Captain Richard Coleman would not be the only person facing disciplinary action. 3 supervisors who ignored previous complaints were also being charged with misconduct. The accountability chain was finally moving upward. And for the first time since the Gala, Maya allowed herself to believe something she had been afraid to hope. Maybe this story would create more than consequences. Maybe it would create change. 6 months later, Washington looked the same. The monuments still stood. The traffic still clogged the streets. Politicians still argued on television. At first glance, nothing had changed, but meaningful change rarely announces itself with fireworks. More often, it arrives quietly. One decision, one policy, one person choosing courage over convenience. The accountability reforms passed unanimously. Independent review procedures became mandatory. Officers assigned to private events received expanded oversight training. Complaint investigations could no longer disappear inside filing cabinets. The reforms were not perfect. No reform ever is, but they were real, and real progress matters. Captain Richard Coleman officially resigned before disciplinary proceedings concluded. His law enforcement career ended not with honor or celebration, but with public scrutiny and personal reflection. The supervisors who ignored previous complaints faced consequences as well. Several lost leadership positions, others retired. The message was unmistakable. Accountability no longer stopped at the lowest level. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks continued working in community engagement programs. The experience changed him. He spoke openly about the dangers of silence. Young officers listened, many thanked him, some disagreed. That was fine. Conversations mattered more than comfort. Councilwoman Rebecca Morgan's legislation became a model for other cities. Officials from across the country requested copies. Public hearings generated additional reforms. What started in one hotel hallway gradually reached far beyond Washington. For Maya Bennett, life moved forward. She graduated from Georgetown Law near the top of her class. Her father sat proudly in the audience. So did Marcus Reed. When her name was called, applause filled the auditorium. Not because of the headlines, not because of the controversy, because everyone who knew her understood how hard she had worked. The diploma represented years of sacrifice, Years of late-night studying, years of double shifts, years of refusing shortcuts. After graduation, Maya accepted a position with a respected civil rights law firm. Her first case involved a teenager who had been wrongly detained by private security officers. The similarities were impossible to ignore, yet Maya approached the case with professionalism rather than anger. That distinction mattered. Justice requires passion, but it also requires discipline. One evening, after finishing work, Maya visited the small cemetery where her mother rested. The summer air was warm. Birds moved through nearby trees. The city felt far away. She stood quietly for several minutes, then she touched the gold bracelet around her wrist, the same bracelet, the same reminder, the same connection. "I did it, Mum," she whispered. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. No answer came. None was necessary. Some forms of love remain present long after words disappear. Later that night, Maya met her father for dinner. Not a public event, not a ceremony, just family. Halfway through the meal, James Bennett asked a question. "Do you ever wish none of it happened?" Maya thought carefully. The humiliation, the attention, the stress, the months of public scrutiny. Then she considered the reforms, the reopened cases, the conversations, the people who finally felt heard. "I wish it hadn't happened," she said, "but I'm glad people stopped looking away afterward." James smiled. It was the answer he hoped for. Outside the restaurant, the city lights reflected against the pavement. Cars passed. People hurried home. Life continued. As it always does, but somewhere in Washington, a young officer spoke up when something felt wrong. Somewhere else, a citizen filed a complaint, believing it might actually matter. A supervisor chose accountability over convenience. A witness decided to record instead of remaining silent. Small choices, important choices, the kinds of choices that shape communities, the kinds of choices that shape history. Maya Bennett's story was never really about a hotel ballroom. It was about dignity. It was about courage. It was about the responsibility every person carries when confronted with injustice. Most importantly, it was about a simple truth. The world changes when ordinary people decide that silence is no longer acceptable. And sometimes, one voice is enough to help others find their own. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.